Welcome to There Is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell. I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs. I've been in business since 1994. The purpose of this podcast is to give you the real deal, to talk about what works and most importantly, why it works, and to talk about what doesn't work, like some of the scams and hacks out there that you guys bring to me, and I can talk about why it doesn't work. Hence the name, The Method to the Madness. Today, I'm going to talk about a concept called total work. Hard work pays off. But let's talk about what work actually really is when we use the definition. Before I get to that, let me thank our very first loyal, honorable sponsors, Jonathan and Lynn Gilden of the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. Look, we want to simply use the people that are the best. At least I do. That's very important for me to want to make sure that whatever professionals I use are the best. I've been burned a few times. I don't want to say too many times because I try to listen to that advice that I give you and really try to follow it. But I've been burned a few times where I've used somebody who isn't exactly great at what they do. And it happened to me a few years ago in real estate before I met the Gildens. So it's really important to work with a team that knows absolutely what they're doing. Everybody I referred to them has been happy, and I just think they're the best. So give them a shout. Jonathan and Lynn are the owners, and they will help you out. 386-451-2412. Okay, so total work. Total work. Now, it's often said that if we want to accomplish things, we have to put in the work, right? I mean, we hear that all the time, and that is absolutely true. So I want to talk about what total work is in the exercise world and the fitness world, because it is different from what you may think that it is. All right, so let me give you a few examples here, and then we can talk about it. And most importantly, we can talk about how we can best utilize this so we can become more physically fit and be more motivated, perhaps, if we know what actually the job is that we have to accomplish. So let's take running and walking. Now, I don't want to throw people off when I talk about some of the issues with time versus distance, okay? Because there are some black and white people out there that are going to say, I thought the American College of Sports Medicine said we have to put in at least 150 minutes per week of cardiorespiratory exercise to get minimal benefits, and I know they're not going to state it just like that. Or we have to put in 300 minutes of moderate intensity to get further benefits. And all of these things are true, okay? So I do proclaim that the minutes mantra of getting in activity is true, all right? So when I tell you that when it comes to certain things, total work is more about the miles we put in than the minutes, I don't want you to get all your panties in a wad saying, well, wait a minute, that's inconsistent from what the ACSM says regarding minutes. And you know what? It's not. It's not inconsistent. We can hold two thoughts at one time. We can have two things be true at one time. So the reason why these activity minutes are pushed as far as getting minimal activity out of people nationwide is because minutes do matter in the sense of getting some activity in and exercising. But if we really want to get objective, if we want to keep things as consistent as possible, or we can always trace it, track it, and measure it, we should understand what total work is in exercise. So, for example, when we go for, say, a 3-mile run, All right. A lot of variables within this 3 mile run. We have number one, it's a run versus a walk. Number two, it's 3 miles. Now, another variable is time. This run could take somebody who's really super fast, like 18 minutes. It could take somebody who's a slower jogger or whatever, and I'm not putting value statements on this. I'm just using this so you can understand. It might take them 40 minutes. All right. Now, if we walk this 3 miles, I mean, if you're walking, say, at a very leisurely pace, this could take you an hour where you're doing a 20-minute mile. So there's variables. Then there's the intensity involved, like how hard were we pushing? Were we at a high intensity, like 90 to 100%? Were we at a moderate intensity where we were around 75 to 80%? Were we at a low intensity where we were like 60 to 70%? So there's that variable. And then there's the variable of where we did it. Were we on a treadmill? Were we outside? So there's all these variables. But guess what? There's only one variable in all this that is considered work, meaning measurable. And that is the distance that you covered, the miles. The miles is the actual work. The time is how long it took you to get there. That's why, and this confuses some people, it was in my first book, and it's really nothing new to us in the exercise world, but a lot of people had no idea. But I said a mile is a mile is a mile. So in other words, if you walk a mile or if you run a mile, you are essentially burning the same amount of calories within 10%. And studies have shown that it's within 10%. So that's like really close. And people are like, well, why? Running's so much harder. It's like, right, but if you run the mile, you're out there for a shorter period of time. Let's say you ran an 8-minute mile, or you walked a 16-minute mile, right? It's still a mile. It's just one took you twice as long because you walked it. Same amount of calories burned. So in the case of running, walking, so weight-bearing outdoor or indoor exercise, actually, a mile is a mile. So the mile becomes the total work. All right. So when people say, well, I'm going for a 30-minute walk, that's fine. And if you did that 5 more times, you're meeting your requirement for activity for the American College of Sports Medicine of at least 150 minutes. But we can be more active, which is great, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're always getting more fit. We have to think about like the total work that we're going to put in. And yes, there are harder miles and easier miles. All these things are true. So yes, we need intensity to get more fit. Absolutely. But when you know you have a certain amount of work to do, it's important to understand what that work is. All right. So let's say somebody says, well, I'm going for a 30-minute walk. And they go outside and they kind of walk to the stop sign, then they meander back and they walk back to the stop sign. I mean, essentially they were outside for 30 minutes, right? And this is, of course, an exaggeration, but it's an exaggeration that could easily happen. So it's basically somebody went outside for 30 minutes for a quote unquote walk, but they got very little work in, right? Or a person says, well, I'm going for a 3-mile walk. Okay, that's very measurable. We know how long that 3 mile was. Now, whether they did it hard or easy, that's, okay, that's up to them and it depends on their goal, but they put in the same amount of work, okay? So in all of our modes of exercise, we want to understand what that work is, because the only way we get better is if we overload, right? So what are we trying to overload? And in the case of volume, that means how much. It's work. Now, if we get to a bike, it's the same thing. Not an indoor bike. That's different because you don't know how it's set up. Now, they have different types of computers that pick up the size of the flywheel and how fast you're pedaling and what level you're at. Yeah, and they try to make it close, but this isn't so much about the indoor bicycle mechanisms, unless you can track watts and then it's more accurate. But that's neither here nor there. If we're pedaling outside, the work, once again, is the miles. Now, they could be easier miles or harder miles. It could be 20 miles down in a beach cruiser with a single gear, and that is obviously harder than doing the same distance on an 18 speed, right? Or 21 speed, depending on the gearing on your bike. But the miles are the miles. That's the total work. So if you say, I'm riding my bicycle 150 miles per week, and you know you have to maintain that, that would be the total work that you are putting in. I don't know why I randomly picked 150, but whatever. Whatever that distance is, you know that's the work that you're putting in. And again, it's very different than saying, well, I'm biking 2 hours a week. It's like, okay, so, one day you just really didn't feel like biking a whole lot, and you spent the whole time sitting on your bike, checking your text messages. And yes, I see people do that now and then, like, oh God. It's like, number one, not only is it unsafe, but number two, it's like, where is your focus? Can't you take a timeout for a minute from your machines, as Arnold Schwarzenegger calls them, or your devices, your gadgets? Can't you take a little bit of a timeout from that? But yes, I see that now. But maybe that's, the person doing that, and then the next day they're out on their bike for the same amount of time, but they're totally focused and they're pushing the whole time and they get more miles in. So one day they did more work than the other, even though both days they spent the same amount of time outside. So that is the work for cycling. For swimming, it's the distance gone. It's the yards, meters, miles, whatever. Once again, it's the distance. You can say, I swam for 30 minutes. Okay, so what did you do? Well, I did a lap, then I sat there and, took some sips of my Gatorade and checked my Instagram, and then I did another lap, and it's like, okay. But if you say I swam a mile, 1,650 yards in the pool, so that's the total amount of work you put in. Now, if you varied that by doing using fins or things like that, yeah, you're impacting the work. But if it's straight freestyle or whatever you do, then you put in the work, all right? So now let's bring it to lifting. I had this conversation with the client, I believe it was yesterday. So what is total work in the gym? Is it time? Well, I think you figured out now that it's not. Spending 30 minutes in the gym is better than spending 30 minutes in the bar or 30 minutes in a recliner, for sure. But it still matters as far as what we're doing and quality control. Like, that's our job as trainers. It's like, here at my gym, we do 30 or 45-minute sessions, and it's our job to make sure that those are efficient, effective 30 to 45-minute sessions with that. And one way we do that is we think about total work. So total work with weightlifting or strength training is going to be your sets times your reps times your load. That's like your total work. So let's say you did 10, that'd be a lot. Let's say you did 3 sets of 10 reps, so that's 30, and you used 10 pounds. So times that again, that's 300. Now, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, some exercises 10 pounds is a very effective load, like for shoulder raises or dumbbell curls or kickbacks or something like that. So the sets times the reps times the load is going to be your total work. Now, do you have to sit there and do the math on all this? No, not at all. Of course not. But that is why we keep track of sets and reps and loads, so we know that we're overloading. So oftentimes you'll see experts sometimes, if they are dropping your sets, let's say they're going from, say, 4 sets to 3 sets, sometimes the reps are increased. That way the total work stays the same. But in any event, the total work in the gym, when it comes to weightlifting and strength training, is going to be the total volume times the sets times the reps times the load. Like, that's the work done. If we really want to think about this from a giant perspective, okay? So let's say the job that you have to do, and I do this sometimes, by the way, like some of this equipment at the gym is hard, if I have to say move a leg press from one side of the gym to the other. Now, number one, I'm not going to do this by myself, but most importantly, what I want you to do is think about this for a second. That is work, right? You have to move that thing. Nobody says, well, how long did that take? I mean, they might say that, but like, does it matter? I mean, like, it could have taken all day, but that's because you moved it an inch and then you sat back and you hung out and that doesn't matter, right? So the time at the gym doesn't matter. You have to move this, 500 and probably 600 pound leg press, because it's got a 500 pound stack on it. I'm sure the rest of the steel is 100 pounds. So 600 pound leg press from one side of the gym to the other. So that's work, all right? So that's what, like, when we're lifting weights, that's what we're doing. We're working. We're moving that load a certain distance, so that would be the reps, and we're just breaking those reps up, and that would be the sets. So it doesn't matter how many minutes you spend in the gym. I mean, there's been people that train very efficiently that we can literally knock out 30 sets of strength training, which is a lot, in 30 minutes. I mean, they're just humping it. And then I've seen some people that struggle to get through 10 in 30 minutes. So, but like, the amount of work put in is the sets and the exercises, the reps and the load. I mean, that's the total work volume. It's not the amount of time you spent doing it. And there are different fitness levels, which means you may or may not need more rest than somebody else. But the total work you do is going to be that. The sets, the reps, the load. That's the total work done. The total amount of metal you've pushed across the gym, so to say. You have a job to do. There's work to do. So when you go out and exercise, I want you to think about that. And if you're not sure, I mean, in most cases when we're talking cardio, it's the distance covered, not the time covered. And in most cases when we're talking strength, it's going to be the reps, the sets, and the load. That's the total work done. But, if you're not sure, ask me. But I want you to think about the total work done, because, it's important to put in a good day's work, right? This isn't only about being physically fit. It's about being mentally and emotionally fit as well. I was listening to a podcast today, and it's a comedian lady, but she has a great podcast, very, very thought-provoking. And it has a little bit of a recovery slant to it. And she said, if you want to build your esteem, you have to do esteemable things. I'm like, man, I like that. I'm going to throw that into my podcast today, because that's where this fits in. Like, if you want to accomplish work, right? I mean, sure, you might feel good about yourself if you have been exercising and you go and exercise for 30 minutes. Absolutely. Like, I don't want to discourage anybody from doing that. Absolutely feel good. But if you really want to feel good, think about what you accomplished. You might say, and I know people that have done this, say, man, I never have walked 3 miles before. Okay, that's esteemable. Like, it's going to build their self-esteem. Or I've never lifted this weight this many times. They didn't say, man, I'm so proud of myself. I went to the gym for 30 minutes. I mean, they might, and that's good if you haven't been. But I've definitely heard people talk about the work they've put in. Like, I've never done 5 sets of 10 pull-ups, right? That is something I've done, and I think, man, that I like that. That's total work. Not, I'm going to do some pull-ups today, but what work did I put in? What did I accomplish? I talked about the gravel grit ride in a previous podcast that Ellen and I did, and I know how long it took me because I was out there, so time matters. But at the same time, what I'm happy about is the fact that, like, it was 23.3 grueling miles, the first half entirely climbing, and we covered 2,500 feet in altitude up, and then we came down 2,500 feet. So it's the work we put in. It's not like, we were up in the mountains and we rode for 2 hours and 35 minutes, whatever the heck it was. No, it was, we did 23 miles plus of really hard, rocky terrain climbing, right? It's the work we put in that builds self-esteem. So again, getting back to my contrarians who are going to say, but you guys are putting in your emails about the ACSM's recommendation of 150 minutes a week. Yes, all of that is true, okay? We need some sort of way to get us moving and get us going, but two things can exist in our mind at one time. That can be true, and then also can be true is how are we spending that time? Are we doing work, or are we kind of like working at getting going and we're not doing a whole lot during that time? And again, we're all different with that and we have different days. I get it. Like some days we don't want to put in as much work as other days because we might not have had enough sleep or we might not be feeling well. That's fine. Like I'm not saying we don't do that. I'm just saying think about what is work in the exercise that you do, right? Whether it be walk, whether it be swim, whether it be jog, whether it be run, are you putting in the work or are you putting in the time, right? Now, again, both are important, but how do we think about the work we put in? Very, very important to think about, all right? Now, speaking of putting in the work, Overhead Door of Daytona Beach puts in the work. I'm not just saying that. I mean, I trained both Jeff Hawk and Zach Hawk, father and son who own the company. And man, I tell you what, even though they own it, it's like they're never not working. Poor Zach, gets in here sometimes a few minutes late and he's frustrated because he's been busting his hump, answering text messages, calling people back, getting everything done. I mean, they want to do everything right because they want a good reputation, and that's what it takes to run a good business, all right? So I really want you to check them out if you need any overhead door help, any garage door help whatsoever. I love their slogan. It goes up and it goes down. And, oftentimes we don't think about that kind of stuff until we need to. Like we think, I take for granted my car always starts. I take for granted my garage door opens. It's like, yeah, and then when it doesn't, you wish you had gotten the right one, right? I mean, speaking of windows and doors opening up, I can remember that I went to Universal Studios once, and I pull into the parking garage, and I go to park, and my windows were down because you know how you pull them down, roll them down to pay the person at the thing, so it was down. I park, get in my parking spot, and guess what? My window doesn't go up. The motor was fried. So now I'm like, okay, what do I do? I mean, my car totally unlocked, window down in the parking garage, and, risk getting it stolen. Ironically enough, it's the same car that did get stolen a few years later, but that's a whole nother story. We went into the park, enjoyed the day, but the whole time, well, I didn't enjoy the day. Whole time in there, I'm thinking about if my car's going to be there when I get back. So it's those kind of things. It's like, do whatever items we have, do they work, right? So I love their slogan because it's important to have quality. It goes up, it goes down. So check them out at overheaddordaytona.com.